in life. So he knows I am walking on the path of the dharma. I am doing something for the sake of larger good, for the building of the nation. And in that process, even if everything is destroyed, if I am an intellect, then I will create it again. And therefore, this person in his life, he has not only written Arthashastra, one of the masterpiece of all time, but he has also created a empire. He was in a true sense, he was a person who could make from nobody. He created a king, an emperor. So Shastra and Shastra, what we say in Sanskrit, there are two words. There are weapons, and there are also, you can say, treatises, or there are also sciences of something. So to have science of something and to also have a weapon for something, these are the two ideas which have come together in this person, Shastra and Shastra. And there's a wonderful Sanskrit verse that Shastrena Rakshate Rashtre, Shastra Chinta Pravartate. Loosely translated, it means weapons protect nation and scriptures perpetuate it. So that is what this person was understanding and trying to explain to each one. Now we come to the age and the individual, which age he was. So of course we are not worried about the historicity, or we are not going to bog down by the chronologies. This experiment or this project is not about telling the entire chronology of our history, though we should, according to me, we should have a good grip on it for our own reference. We are not going to take undue support of it, but we should have some understanding of it. Otherwise we do not know what was the time and what was the parallel situations in Europe, in China, in the Middle East. If you know that, then we are able to get the connects very fast. So if you try to connect this entire, which I have tried to connect this exercise on the Egyptian Mesopotamian culture, what was happening during the last 3,000 or 4,000 years, and what was happening in India, what was happening in China, you get a better understanding of this entire situation, because India was very victoriously dealing with all these other empires and the civilizations, as we know. So Magad, it was the time of Janapadas. The time is 300 to 200 BC, which is largely accepted by most of the scholars, except few exceptions who say Chanakya was 1,500 years before Common Era, but that's very exceptional. 300 to 200 looks to be the most common and accepted choice. And that time the king Nanda was oppressing. We know this story, so I'm not going into detailing of this. We'll try to understand how this has been, approached. So Chanakya is a worshipper of knowledge, and that's why the revenge what he has taken is not for his personal ego. In fact, as we go ahead, you'll know, as a person, we will try to understand, he was a selfless person, much adept in yoga and other spiritual practices. And he had intellectual strength, tapas, purity of intention, and through that, he had the ability to mentor a right instrument for political and economic strength. That's a Shakti. And therefore, he is a kingmaker, a law and code giver. He is a dharma sansthapak, a nation builder, you can say. And if you just see the map of Mauryan Empire and its spread during that time, I put it here because started from 250 BC and then continued through to the next 3-4 centuries at least. You can see the work done through the conviction and the faith in our culture and the traditions and the intellectual prowess, how somebody can try to get something in the real world. So Arthashastra, one of the greatest probably books ever written by human beings, I may say, is a book which has got 15 adhikaranas, 150 adhyaya and 180 prakarana. This is just some technical details of that. Some people call it Chanakya, but Chanakya Niti is a different text, different book, and it is nothing but collection from his original Arthashastra. It is not, mostly Chanakya Niti is not written by Kautilya. It is written by some other people, like it's a abridged volume of it. So I'm not referring that. I'm only referring the original one, which is accepted as Arthashastra. So in the 15 adhikaranas, the first 5 are talking of polity, economy, and internal security. The next 8 are talking about international policies. The 14th one talks about the mantra and tantra, because this had the origin is from the Vedas, and in Vedas also Atharva Veda deals with many such things of the mystic practices. And 15th is actually a very wonderful thing, short, but it is a summary. It's also explaining methodology used for writing the book. He explains there, so that is a great help. And there are many topics. I cannot go in all details because that will become another presentation. I will love to do that. So many details are there about Arthashastra. but just to give you a few glimpses of it, it is about education of prince, about spy, how many types of spies should be there and how they should be trained and used, how the Dut should work, and Dut is a messenger, so how a messenger should be trained and how he should work, how many types of Dut can be there. Then how many people are types of people required and their organization structure. So he uses several terms like Amatya, Mantri and all. I'll go through one of the quote where you will get to know so many types of people he has talked about. And then he talks about the forts, how many types of forts should be there, what should be organization of fort and organization of the city or the town, strategies used for decision making, and the spy network which should be there in nation as well as outside the nation, economics, very detailed economic, state and tax policies and tax structure, polity, judiciary, ethics, management, treasury, so many aspects he has taken. Then about weights and measures or punishments and percentages to be used for tax. I mean, if you look at the detailing of it, that's where the intellect, you can see a person can so much detail or meticulously he can think of something, and it's amazing. For example, I'm just reading some of the parts from that, just avoiding going into too many details, because reading Arthashastra detailed studies not today's our work. It can be done some other time in a different way. But I'm just reading some of them. For example, in one of the sutra, he says that those who conspire to lower the prices of the work done by the artisans, or to hinder their income, or to obstruct their sale or purchase, shall be fined. So he has taken special measures to see how the artisans' interest will be protected, how to know people who are trying to do something wrong with them. Then he's also talking about boundaries, how to denote the boundaries by the river or a mountain or the forest, or by the brishti, which is called as some type of plants. Or if the boundaries are not able to be found by that, then at least have some artificial building, which is called as setubandha, or by some shalmali, which is a silk cotton tree. So many types how you can make the boundaries of your kingdom. Then he talks about how many types of people are required to guard the entrances into the kingdom, and he has given the list which says that there are trap keepers called as Vagurika, archers, which are Shabara, hunters, Pulinda, Chandalas, and wild tribes. So they all should be used for protecting your kingdom, apart from your army and other things. Those who perform sacrifices, Ritvika, spiritual guides, priests, those who have learned Vedas, and all that detailing he has done, that who should be given what, and who should be exempted from taxes. He is writing who should be fined for wrong things. And then there are superintendents, accounts, gopals, thanikas, veterinary surgeons called anikastha, then physicians, horse trailers, messengers. They all should be also endowed with lands which they shall have no right to alienate by sale or mortgage. Means their sustenance was ensured, all these people, but they cannot mortgage it or they cannot sell it to the third party. It is only for their own sustenance. And then he also says that lands prepared for cultivation shall be given to taxpayer, there is karada, only for some time. All the detailing he has given. Then a king with depleted treasury will eat into the very vitality of both citizens and country people. That is a very wonderful observation he makes. That if the king is not having enough treasury, he will become very dangerous and he will eat into the vitality of his own citizens. And he had seen such examples when he first took the oath of overthrowing the oppressive king himself. And then he says the weights and measures should be standardized and all merchants have to comply with that. And then he has also made some rules about constitution of a legal agreement. And then there should be element of transparency even before signing the agreement. And even oral agreements that time were valid, but there has to be a witness procedure and all some procedures laid down. So I mean, what I'm trying to say is we can go on telling about his way of detailing the perfection in the forming of the laws and the dictums. And then in one place he says artisans shall in accordance with the agreement as to time, place, form of work fulfill their engagement. Those who postpone their engagements under the excuse that no agreement as to time, place or form of the has been entered into shall, except in troubles and calamities, not only forfeit 1/4 of their wages, but also will be punished with equal fine to twice the amount of their wage. So it's like a very systematically made a document, that. And now also we know if you want to make some legal document, how carefully you have to choose the words, and you have to another interesting just example I'll take and I will come back, because there are so many and so many. that physicians undertaking medical treatment without intimating the government, depending on the dangerous nature of the disease, shall, if the patient dies, be punished with the first their installment of all these things that he has written. That means if a patient dies because of a physician who has not taken prior permission for practice from government, then the liability or the responsibility depends on the remains with the physician. There is no part of life, you can say, where he has not commented, he has not made the laws for. In case of widow, what should be done? In case of children, what should be done? What should be the property, this, that, and then the taxes, foreign trade, internal trade, what should be the profit margins, how the profit should be derived, how the king should be having his different ways of his behavior and his rules for him, the education required for him, the education required for the prince in all this, that Ashwavidya and this, what should be timetable of him, and how we should do Shravan, Manan, and the Indriya Nigraha. Everything has been put down. Just one example, and then I will go ahead. He says you should collect tax like honey collected by bees from the flowers, because when you collect the taxes, you should not hurt the people. So that type of thing. And this Arthashastra and Chanakya, he has talked about all the ways, that is Sam, Dam, Danda, Bhed. By any way, you should be able to get to your ends. The means don't matter if you're fighting for dharma, and that's that relative standards and the contextual ethics is a very unique thing of India. Sri Aurobindo also writes in one place that it's very difficult to understand by the foreign eye, that how ethics and morals. Yesterday also we were talking that these are not the final ideas. It has to be contextual, and it has to be depending on the consciousness which is behind it. So he has very perfected and wonderfully done that. And then our whole idea of king and his why he is in the power is for the establishment of dharma. So it is both abhyuday and nishreyasa, and for the social welfare as well as the spiritual emancipation. This has to do, and ultimately dharma is supreme, not the individuals, not the king. Power remains with the dharma rules, and therefore economics also was taken into the meta economics. The money, its creation, utilization, distribution was carefully seen. And all moral rules were not for people who are barbaric. So if your enemy is barbaric, he is oppressive, then fight the dharma yuddha. But what is dharma there? It should be determined by somebody who has got the wisdom. So don't stick to the rules. Don't be like some of our kings. They went on giving abhay to the enemies. 10 times he came and surrendered, and these people give the abhay to him. That is not Kautilya. Kautilya says if he comes and surrenders, if you are getting a chance, then kill him. So here he is differing, that he says that it's a context which should be important, not the strict rules. Now, what type of person is that? Inside and outside we are trying to understand. He is a man of great learning, with a character and selfless, detached, determined, spiritually also very elevated. Some of the texts mention him as a sage or muni, and mentally definitely he was outstanding. Spiritually also he was very elevated as per some resources. And a very sharp, precise, cautious, steadfast, ruthless. For ensuring a law implementation, he can go to any extent and ensure that it has to be done. And the social status is higher, so enjoyment should be minimal. That was his idea. I will just narrate very quickly one episode that one person went to him, said that, sir, I have got 2 questions for you. It was late evening, and Kautilya said, yes, you can ask both the questions. Then the person said, first is my official question connected with our office of our king. Second is my personal question, if you can allow me. He said, no problem. And then first question was over, and then he started asking second question. Before that, Kautilya said, just wait for a minute. And then he emptied the oil from the oil lamp which was burning and helping their conversation. He emptied that oil lamp and then put it carefully in one, a pot, earthen pot, and then filled the lamp with other oil from the other pot. And then he started a conversation again by lighting the lamp. And the conversation was over. The person was satisfied. While going, he said, why, sir, you did so much? There were just 2 questions. Then Chanakya replied that, the first question was official. So when I'm using the oil, I'll be using the oil from the salary I'm getting or the resources I'm getting from the king. But when you are asking personal question to me, I have no right to use that oil. So I emptied the oil, I kept it back in the pot. I have replaced it by another oil which I have purchased from my own savings. So for personal things, I will never use the official resource. That's the purity and that's the transparency administrators had that time. You can imagine what type of kingdom it was. And when a foreign visitor came, that's another story, but it's worth understanding this person, that he showed him path to his own home, and the foreigner was perplexed by saying that how such a kingmaker and the nation builder is living in a small hut. So Chanakya said that because I am living in this hut, that's why Mauryan Empire has gone far and wide. So you should understand what austerity, what tapas this person was going through. Even though he is mistaken as somebody who can have a Machiavellian ideas, it's totally wrong, because Machiavelli was in the 14th, 15th century. He is 2 centuries before. So there is no, and he was ruthless and he had unscrupulous ideas, whereas Chanakya was going through the path of the Dharma. So this is a strength of the teacher. He was saying that his intellect was sharp and absolute purity and all these things. We'll just go ahead. But he made the codified systems. Who was the precursor of him? So we find his precursor in Vedas, Upanishad, epics, and Bhagavad Gita. And then Janak Sulabha Samvad, one of the Samvad where Rajarshi's idea has, we have always emphasized the king and the rishi should be in one. So Janaka is telling Sulabha that, something, my one hand is in a fire and second hand is a sandalwood. And that's how a king has to be, because all the time he has to deal with both fire and sandalwood. So that's a wonderful idea of Indian ethos. And Chanakya has also many times mentioned the Trai. He said all my inspirations from the Trai, that is Vedas, Upanishad, and Gita. And is mentioned in many places, especially Atharva Veda and the Brahmanas and Mahabharata and Dharma Shastra. He seems to be having a precursor in Sri Krishna, who is the epitome of wisdom in the age of spirit or Maheshwari, and who was not just philosopher but the strategist, a meticulous planner, a politician, economist, warrior, and of course a avatar. But these are all his attributes in this level. And then Sri Krishna lived the message that how to deal with Jarasandha, how to deal with Kansa, how to deal with all his opponents. He has very clearly told he was himself was a nation building and epoch maker. And then he had many extensions later on, means what Chanakya was, or Vishnugupta or Kautilya, whatever name we take. As we saw the precursor, one point I could get in the age of wisdom or the Maheshwari. Mahakali, which, as Sri Aurobindo also has said, is another nature, not wideness but height, not wisdom but force and strength are her peculiar power. There in her is overwhelming intensity, mighty passion of force to achieve, a divine violence rushing to shatter every limit and obstacle. All her divinity lives out in the splendor of all these things he tells further, which we all know. But this is the Mahakali. So Vishnugupta had a different way of looking at the things, and Sri Krishna had a Maheshwari. That age is different. But further, he also says, after all, she is also a mother, and how she is good for benevolent for the good doers. He explains. Now we get some extensions in bits and pieces in the latter ages. As I said, as the classical age moved further, there was Yajnavalkya Smriti, Manusmriti, and other Shastra Sutras and Smritis, where Kautilya Arthashastra is clearly used as a reference. Many things are common. And then one of the wonderful, interesting references in Panchatantra by Vishnu Sharma. And there, again, a king is trying to teach something to the children. And he says, this is the thing I am taking my base from. That is the Kautilya's Arthashastra. And Panchatantra has explained the same things, but in a very story form or a very lucid form. We come to the 7th, 8th century when Vishakadatta's Mudra Rakshas is another full-fledged, you can say, Natya, where the storyline itself is the intellectual battle between the Amatya Rakshas and the Chanakya or Kautilya. And the entire drama unfolds wonderfully. And we can know that Vishakadatta must have studied Arthashastra in very detail, because every small thing, for example, just one example I'm giving, spies who are hiding inside the walls of the opponents. I mean, they know the construction of the house. They also know where the walls are hollow, and they try to hide inside that. Look at the level of spying and look at the level of the information from the opponent, which was there with Kautilya and which Vishakadatta reproduced. So wonderful drama, Mudra Rakshas. And then there is Raghuvamsha of Kalidas. People think Kalidas is only poet of beauty and harmony, no doubt about that. He is is like a Himalaya in that. But Raghuvamsham also has, even Meghdutta has many things other than the main storyline. Similarly, Raghuvamsham in detail it has given how there should be administration and how king should be, how the Dharma Rakshan or Dharma Sthapana is the main thing. So he has used the story of Raghuvamsha only to take care of that in the 7th, 8th century. Now you see the difference. The extension is the age of harmony, beauty, and therefore there is a perfection of form and words, but there is no strength in that. The strength of intellect or the strength of actually physically doing it on the making of the empire, that was not there in the words. That's a difference, a very interesting difference I found, because it is now from God and light, now we have come to the bliss, or from spirit and mind it has come to the vital. In our other cycles you can see. So see the difference between Raghuvamsham, Vishakadatta's Mudra Rakshas versus Arthashastra. You will probably know what I am trying to tell. And that which followed was a tremendous creativity. You know, the 10th century is full of vitality, intellectuality, creativity, and in every field, as in the Renaissance, he tells, India was creating, and the intellect was trying to give the Shastra for that, so that there is no unbound or uncontrolled creativity also, or vitality can also be dangerous for a state or a Rashtra. So that control was brought by the Shastras, the control was brought by the Sutras, and that is what was pioneered by the Kautilya. And that's why the intellect was very important, third quality, as Sri Aurobindo says, in the characteristic soul of India, and that persisted. Now you see another very important idea in the real life, in the statecraft and management also we find one extension, because this is a centripetal. I'm talking of the the centrifugal force, where from the 1st century it has gone out. First I saw in the 8th, 9th century in the literature. Now in the real kingdoms also were made, and they have taken clue from Kautilya's work and his Arthashastra, and right from Maurya to Gupta to Chola, Chera, Pallava, Rashtrakuta, Chalukya, Yadava. I could go in detail of all these people in this time in between where I was. I was amazed to see many of these kingdoms. If you look at their construction of their forts, or the way they have put the organization of different human beings, human resources in the Koshadhyaksha or Ramatya or Mantri and all, it is all based exactly on Arthashastra. So Arthashastra gave them the physical strength also to create a kingdom, not only for Mauryans but even afterwards. So it has been very clearly, when you look at the same thing happening in the southern kingdoms also, you know that how Indian soul is same, and the Arthashastra has been translated not only in the other Indian parts, in other parts of India, it has been also taken out of India. So I'm just coming to that when Indian had a cultural expansion in entire Southwest Asia, Northwest and Northeast Asia, and beyond that, then we saw that everywhere Arthashastra has gone, Panchatantra has gone, Subhashita has gone, Niti Shataka has gone. So that is very important, because Indian ethos are actually practically put intellectually and thereafter in the form of a literature in these formats. That's why that was the first thing they took and they translated, and that's why the Southeast kingdoms also, you find that the same ideas have been taken from Arthashastra. You are amazed to see how a single person ultimately was having this type of extension both in space and time, and then it has made something in the real world, physical world also, intellectual world also, vital world also. And then we come to the one of the classic examples. This is the extension of Kautilya, which is most remarkable for, I found, complete, more complete than anything else. Yeah, in the previous slide I wanted to tell you one of the remarkable example of Vijayanagar Empire, which was a shining, you can say, retaliation done by the people who were trying to protect the dharma of this land, and therefore they were again sort of inspired by a person from the spiritual mooring. He was a spiritual person, Vidyaranya. So Vidyaranya made Harihar Bukka to do this work, that they should establish a new kingdom, they should become the Dharma Samsthapanartha. They should again take the sword in their hand and try to kill the oppressive enemy. If you look at it, all these people have worked in that direction, where the spiritual person or the righteous person, the Brahmana, when I'm saying Brahmana not by caste but by the Gunakarma and his Svabhava and his intellect and his spiritual elevation, he is trying to give that power to the Kshatriya, or the the person who is the warrior with the valor. There is a Chandragupta or Harihara, every example is filled with that. There are many other examples from Kadamba and other dynasties I am avoiding here, but let me tell you, there is enough to work in detail on this, and I have been doing that. So India, beyond India also, there is a lot of things which you can talk about. But we come to the completer example here, which is in Chhatrapati Shivaji. I mean, I would like to quote one of the great thinkers on this, Professor Narar Kurunkar. In one of his essays, he writes that the king which Kautilya was envisaging was he envisioned almost in 200 BC, got a complete expression almost 1800 years later. That's where that India on the March is so wonderful, that we are not going chronologically. That 200 BC got expression in 1630, almost 1800 years afterwards, exactly what Kautilya was trying to drive Chandragupta and build the Mauryan Empire. But the expression is not complete in Chandragupta. Remember, it is not in Harshavardhana, it is not in Rajaraja Chola. The expression gets complete in Chhatrapati Shivaji, which is 1630 to 1680. just a life of 50 years. But he has taken everything almost, from guerrilla war to night wars to loot to navy, emphasis on navy, surgical strikes, and the trade and commerce, spies, situational leadership. You go and just talk about that, and you'll find that everywhere there is something Kautilya's Arthashastra. And whether he had any teaching in that, because as I'm going, I will show you the source from which he derived it. And that's why now in the cycle, now we are from the bliss to the freedom. We started with God, and there was light, and there is, now we have come to the further part of it. So when we understand this particular cycle, now we have come to the cycle of Shivaji, means after 1000 AD, after that, it has again taken a turn. So you find there is more and more emphasis on freedom, or more and more emphasis on the physical part of it. Vital and physical slowly are there's a transition time for it. And therefore, the person, as a person, he was deeply spiritual, very selfless, very detached. In one place, he gave his kingdom to his spiritual master Ramdas, and say, this all kingdom belongs to you, I don't want anything. And this Ramdas also is so selfless that he gave the kingdom back to him, and he said, what I will do, I don't want it, you take it back, and you just ensure that the Rajya of Dharma will come. Because he always used to say that this to establish his kingdom is basically God's wish, and that is what has been told by Chanakya or everybody, that we are all doing for the Ishwar Pranidhana. Ultimately, that is what is the sutra. And these are the examples, that he will deceive, he will tell lie, he will break rules, he will forget promises, and he will say that this is a war I am waging, and it's not a sermon I am giving you. So this king is the king which Kautilya wanted. But look at the time period, 1800 years he had to wait for somebody to do that. And then, in only difference is there was only one Chanakya there, there are many people who have made this particular possibility. There is Jizabai, there is Shahji, Datoji, Samarth Ramdas, Shivaji. And then curious extension into the another 300 years, 200 years, that Ramchandra Amatya, who has written the letter to Shivaji's successors. And that is another piece which today is studied, because Ajnapatra written by Ramchandra Amatya, or the Dasbodh written by Ramdas, or the experiment done by Khalsa, especially Guru Gobind Singh's experiment, they all show how the extension can happen in cycles. This is a different way of looking at history, probably, I felt. I'm not going chronologically. I'm not telling this is 1600 and this is 1800 and this is 300 BC. This is the soul of India. Soul of India has come back in Ajnapatra again. And that Ajnapatra is exactly, you can say, extension of Kautilya's Arthashastra. And therefore, and you look extension in time and space. Look at Atan Burghan and Lachit Barphukan in Assam and Saraighat's war. Look at Rudra Singha and the Rahasyapatra he wrote to the king of Tripura, that we should protect Dharma of the Vedas. And what he's called second Shivaji. Time is 18 to 1980. Time has passed, but the fire has not extinguished. The fire still remains. Soul of India is still there, and it's still coming very strongly. It refuses to get extinguished. Then we have Vasudeva Balavan Phadke. He also tells that he's Shivaji. So the flame which was lit at Sahyadri had its origin in the Magad and Pataliputra, and that had its origin into the Mahabharata's Kurukshetra war. So that is exactly what is that. These all people had great conviction, great intellect, pious life as individuals, and they had this conviction that we are fighting this war for the sake of God and for the Dharma, for the righteousness. And the size of your opponent does not matter. Fight back with small size, but great intellect, intention, and righteousness as the force behind you. You are fighting for establishing Dharma, and Parthasarathi will show you the path. And that is the fire which has gone far and wide today. You look at the Vietnam, the way they have fought with US, and Vietnam's, if you know, the people who are leading it, they have said we have got our inspiration from Chhatrapati Shivaji. And I will not be surprised if somebody has studied Arthashastra also. So far and wide, people have taken inspiration from this. That's the extension we are talking. And then the cycle is complete. We have come to the last part in the first cycle. Now the second cycle starts. As we know, yesterday also at the end we were talking that the second cycle will not start in the first point. It will now get at the elevation. It will go slightly up, because even in its fall it has gathered reaches. In foundations, Sri Aurobindo says, even in the fall also Indian culture will gather reaches. That's why after the era of Maratha kingdom and then the British also, which ultimately helped us to get back to the central united force, when the second cycle started, the age of new dawns, that time the elevation has come, because the consciousness has raised now. Now we come to the Calcutta Congress when Tilak and Swami Vivekananda talk with each other. One, the man of wisdom, the second, the man of action. And there we get again the same dialogue which Sri Krishna was telling Arjuna, or they were discussing, or Kautilya was telling Chandragupta, or Ramdas was talking with Shivaji. So there is some similarity in that, because Tilak says that, Swamiji says that, Tilak, you are such a pious and great spiritual person. Why you are in politics? You come to the Belur and you can easily assume one of the great positions here, and I will go there and I will fight the war against British. I mean, they knew each other very jokingly, but they knew that they can easily exchange the things with each other because there is an integral view in their mind. That becomes more clear with Tilak and Sri Aurobindo in Surat Congress, when they knew that for the sake of establishing Dharma and for the sake of bringing India back to her soul and reasserting it, not by becoming docile people of the West, we need to do something different. And that came then the Swaraj boycott and Mandir and the Jaipur jail. So there you get that connection where Sri Krishna again meets Sri Aurobindo and Vivekananda also, and they try to tell him what is going to be the work ahead now. And that is what Sri Aurobindo also tells, that the task we set before ourselves is not mechanical but moral and spiritual. Of this task, politics is a part, but only a part. That's the understanding of politics, economics, and everything for India. There's a part of the whole thing, not the only thing for us. And same thing Sri Aurobindo says one of the later, when Barin Ghosh came back from the life imprisonment because he was punished after the Maliktola, that whole thing. When he came back, he wrote a letter to Aurobindo asking Sri Aurobindo, that asking for guidance. And there Sri Aurobindo has mentioned that what we now need is a worship of intellectual strength, Shakti, because we have forgotten her. That's why this India has become, all the youths of India are not able to think originally, not think deeply and all. So wonderful ideas. We can go back and see the Shakti aspect, or the intellectual strength as well as the strength of physical transformation can come there. And because this is a new cycle, so the new consciousness now has elevated it to change of the physical transformation also. But this is the idea which you should say. Just to get a glimpse of it, just look at the conversation which Sri Aurobindo has written as a fictional conversation between Shivaji and Mirza Raje. The conversation from the date, if you read that, you may understand what I'm trying to convey. In that conversation, Mirza Raje says that I am also a pious person, I also follow Dharma, I do prayers more than you. Then why you are fighting against me? And why you are not understanding that I am doing the same thing for the Dharma as you? And then Shivaji explains to him, your Dharma goes by the rules, my Dharma goes by the, it's a very wonderful conversation to read. He says that it goes by the righteousness, I follow that. I do not follow what are the things to be done, yes or no, moral and ethical things, as you are doing. That's why you are a servant of a oppressor and I am a nation builder. Like that conversation. And that's why Sri Aurobindo had some view on the Second World War. That's why he had understood the China threat and talked about that, about Tibet, Tibet being taken by China. So many things he has wrote about. He has wrote about future unity of humanity. So we see a cycle getting completed from in one cycle where Kautilya I have taken as a point of focus. From that I got some extension forward. I got some precursors before, but the depth will go into the Kautilya's era itself and its extension there. And then ultimately in the second cycle, I saw that something we can get from Sri Aurobindo's political and early thought, as well as his thought in the three of his works, that is Foundations, Ideal of Humanity, and Human Cycle. So that's a very quick, I can say, overview of